Reconvening our House Investigation Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. Today is September 21st, 2021. It is 2:00 p.m. and we are continuing the questioning of Auditor Les Kondo on the process findings and recommendations set forth in report number 21-01, audit of the Agribusiness Development Corporation. Members present are myself, Vice Chair Ichiyama, Representative Hashem, Representative Yamashita, Representative Tarnas, Representative Kobayashi, and Representatives Peruso. Members, we have quorum, so we have the ability to restart questioning of Mr. Kondo. I understand that there might be some members who have some questions, so I will go through the similar round. We will first have Chair Hashem. No questions? Okay.
Wait, excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
May I actually correct an answer that my response to Representative Hashem from yesterday?
Yes, you may, but before you do that, I just want to remind you that you are under oath and that this is a Chapter 21 hearing. Do you understand that?
Yes.
And also you have the ability to have counsel present with you, and I see that you do not have counsel present with you, and that is by your choice. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't have counsel.
Okay. If you would like to clarify a response you made to us with a question posed by Representative Hashem, you can go ahead.
Okay, no, thank you. I didn't have the chance to look at the report while Representative Hashem was asking me questions yesterday, but I did reread the report after yesterday's hearing. Representative Hashem questioned why we reported that ADC doesn't have policies and procedures. And I heard him ask that question or make that statement again today. But that's not what our report says. You know, what we said, and I want to quote it, we found an organization unaware of its statutory purpose, unable to locate documented policies, procedures, or controls if they in fact exist, and operating with little direction from or involvement from its board of directors, end quote. Now that's on page 10 at the end of the first paragraph. And on page 4 of the report, we had a text box about ADC's poor financial records. And we talked about similar issues that we experienced with respect to our ability to review ADC's operational records that are relevant.
Excuse me, Auditor Kondo, I'm looking at page 10 at the last paragraph. Okay, the last paragraph.
It's the end of the first paragraph, Representative.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so on page 4 in the text box, we also talked about some of the challenges that we had to receive records that were relative to our audit. And in that text box, this is what we said. We said, for instance, when we requested documents essential to the day-to-day operations of a land management agency, such things as land management policies, land acquisition guidelines, inventories of land holdings, tenant listings, and even tenant files, we were informed that they did not exist. However, in a footnote to that, in that text box, footnote to that same sentence, we do report that ADC provided us with a document entitled Land Management Policies and Guidelines. So I don't know if that's a document Representative Hashem was referring to, but what we said about that is we said ADC provided us with a 4-page document entitled Land Management Policies and Guidelines that its staff did not know about before our request. Now, that document, which was last reviewed in 2009, contains only general guidance, not the type of policies and procedures we would expect are reasonably necessary to direct ADC's management of its lands. However, the ADC did not update the general guidance to more specifically address the new responsibilities that were associated with being a landowner after completing its first land acquisition in 2012. In fact, the executive director, who described himself as not a details person, readily conceded the document should be revisited, end quote. Now, on pages 19 and 31 of our report, we asked ADC for certain policies and procedures. What we reported is that ADC told us that ADC does not have documented policies and procedures generally, and not specific to the processes that we were requesting the policies and procedures. So I don't know. So anyway, I don't think that how the question was characterized about what we reported is accurate. And I just wanted to clarify my response to that question. So thank you very much.
Okay. We.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Auditor Kondo. Chair Kobayashi's not on the line. Any question? You know what? I'm not going to go through the list. Any questions from Chair Tarnas? Oh, okay. Chair Kobayashi's now come back on. Chair Kobayashi, any questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't know. I thought we just had our cameras on when we were going to ask questions, but so I just had my camera off. No, I don't have questions right now.
Okay, Chair Yamashita, any questions for you?
Not at this time, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Peruso.
Sure, I actually have tons of questions, but I was wondering, when you were told by ADC that they had no inventory for their lands, I was wondering if your staff, and as you started to get files from them, if you started to put together a spreadsheet of the relevant information that you were looking for, just as a working document, or I'm just wondering how you managed all that information that they had not put together for you.
We did. We did exactly what you're describing. We created a land inventory of their lands that they were not able to provide us. Yes.
And in that land inventory, so this is a little bit of a detail-oriented question, but in that land inventory, did you have an opportunity to try to match the TMKs to the actual parcels? Like, did anybody go down into the weeds at that level? Because what we're hearing from farmers is that there are some inaccuracies, some mismatches between the TMKs being advertised and the actual TMKs, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. I don't know if we did that based upon the records that we had gotten from, and it's all based upon the records that we were able to receive from ADC, that we created this inventory and spreadsheet. But to what you're describing, we did report that. We did observe that some TMKs were not consistent with the license agreement and what was presented to the board, for instance. I think we also reported other inconsistencies between the documents that we saw and the things that the board approved. The board approved, for instance, I think I talked about this yesterday, a license agreement for one parcel, but the license agreement itself was for a different parcel. I don't know if that's the same one or a different one, but the lease rent or the license fee was different between what the board approved and what is actually in the document itself. So we did notice, or we did observe many of the inconsistencies, some of which that you're describing in terms of the TMK, but I don't recall if it was based upon, here's the inventory, we looked at actually where people were occupying. I don't know that answer for you. I'm sorry. We may have, but I don't know off the top of my head if we did that exercise.
That's fine. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, Representative Tarnas.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to follow up just so the committee understands and the public understands how you and ADC come up with their percentage for those lands that are not occupied. We heard from you yesterday that you saw a 75% vacancy rate. And today we were hearing from ADC that they have calculated a 30% vacancy rate. Now, those are substantially different. So could you explain to the committee and for the public what was your calculation based on, and so that everyone understands what the metric is? Thank you.
No, thank you for that question, because I did listen this morning. I heard a number of things that I think I can help clarify, and this is one of them. When we did our calculation, and it's reported on page 14 of our report, we looked only at the Oahu lands. Our report was, at that point of our report, we were looking at the management of ADC's Oahu lands. And I think we talked yesterday about why we had risked out the Kauai lands. So the 75% vacancy rate that we report was Oahu lands only. It did not include the Kauai lands. I do want to make a comment, and I think it's an important comment as you hear what ADC says and as you listen or filter through things. Our audit period, again, June 2019 through March 2020, So, there's things, and it's great to hear the ADC has done things, and they reported some of that today, but a lot of that information that they provided you folks, the things that they've been done, that is outside of our audit period. And like I mentioned yesterday, we don't look at stuff, at least for ADC at this point, until we go back for our follow-up review.
Understood. And let me just ask, when you looked at your occupancy rate, was the denominator in your fraction the total acreage, or was it only the tillable acreage?
No, it was gross. In other words, it was the total acreage.
Okay. And following up on that, I'm just curious, when you determined that the Kauai lands were risked out, they were low risk, so you decided not to include them in this, was there at the time any of these legal issues that have been discussed in the committee's proceedings for the Kauai parcels occurring at that time? And how did that affect your risk analysis?
My assumption, and I'm sorry, I don't have it a fact in my mind kind of thing, but it's my assumption that the legal matters were probably ongoing. Legal proceedings take quite a long time sometimes to resolve. And actually, now that I'm thinking and talking at the same time, I do recall there being some discussion about, I think it was near the end of the clean water lawsuit. I think maybe it had just been resolved sometime during our audit process, because I recall, I think it was probably Myra or somebody telling us that it had been resolved. But other than that, I don't have a clear recollection or an answer for you, Representative, about what else, other legal matters that were pending or what else was going on. I think to answer your question, the clean water matter, the lawsuit that the federal government had filed against ADC, I'm sure that it was a factor or something that the team had gathered in terms of their planning work. And it was something that they had considered in terms of when we were trying to understand what are the key activities, how are they managing their properties. But, like I explained yesterday, at the end of the day, and I think ADC, made a comment that it came as the Kauai lands came as a complete package. That's not their words, but that was my impression of what they were trying to say. And that was our impression as well. They came with tenants already there. They came with license agreements, or I guess license or RPs or whatever they were already in place. So there were different issues there. And the issues that we saw that existed with those properties were different and not as significant as the issues that we were able to see, the activities relating to the Oahu properties that were being acquired and were struggling to be leased or licensed.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that explanation. Back to you, Chair Belatti.
Okay. Vice Chair Ichiyama.
Thank you, Auditor, for being here again today. I'm not sure if you heard the exchange between ADC and the committee this morning about the ability of ADC to review the draft report and the shortened time frame in which they had to provide comments. Do you have any comment or reflection on that period?
I do. I think I heard the discussion. I don't think we ever tell any auditee that we're not going to consider whatever comments that they may have. I don't think that was ever said. In fact, it's not that I don't think. I'm absolutely certain that was never told to them. I don't know what was heard by them, but certainly that is never our position. We will consider whatever information someone wants to give us. In terms of the timing, I understand what Ms. Kaichi was describing to you. It was at the end of the year. I don't remember how many days that we had asked them to provide us their response. I think she had said 13, but I certainly understand it's not 13 work days and there's holidays in between there. So I understand what she is. I don't want to use the word complaining, but what the point that she was making. But at the same time, I don't recall ever getting a request even at the exit conference. So we have the exit conference where we met with Mr. Nagatani and Ms. Kaichi face to face. they have not at that point given us their written comments. And I don't know if they prepared them yet or if they're going to be still to be drafted. But I don't recall ever at the exit conference or any time subsequent to that, any time before that, ever a request coming to us for some additional time. You know, if someone said, hey, we need another 3 months, we would tell them, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to accommodate that. But if someone were to ask for a couple days, you know, whatever, a week because of their staffing and certainly, and I think we recognize that they are not a large staff. And we recognize that throughout the audit. But I guess to answer your question, I don't recall any requests to extend for an extension of time to provide a response.
Can you help me understand the
Sure.
order of events when you provide an auditee with a copy of the draft report and exit interview? What's the sequence there?
When we have the draft completed, we send the draft to the auditee, to the audited agency. And after we send it to them, we ask to set up a time so that we can have an exit conference meeting. After the exit conference, there'll be a few days, whatever the period is, and they provide us with their written comments. So the sequence is the draft goes to them, the exit conference happens, and then the written response, we receive their written response to the audit after that.
Okay, I see. One last question on this, this process you have at the end of the audit. I feel like during the testimony this morning, we heard some confusion on behalf of ADC about the recommendations, about what was meant or what the recommendation was intended to address. And I just wonder if they had a chance to review the recommendations as part of the draft report, that could have been discussed in the exit interview and perhaps led to a clearer understanding or a meeting of the minds on what those recommendations were intended to do.
That's a fair question. I think if you look at the recommendations, the majority of the recommendations are really just coming, I don't want to say verbatim, but basically coming out of the statute. So some of the things that we're recommending they need to do, those are the things that Chapter 163D requires them to do. So they weren't doing these things, whether it's the agribusiness plan, whether it's the details that need to be included in those plans, like the marketing research, like looking at how the transportation issues. Those are required to be part of the agribusiness plan. So what we did in our recommendation is we basically recommended that they do the things that are required under the state law. So that's the majority of those recommendations. There are some recommendations that I think there is some confusion. Like for instance, the procurement recommendation. I heard Ms. Kaichi talk about the fact that before you do procurement, you have to do these procurement classes through the SPO website. And I know that, and I understand that because we got to do that as well. The questions that we were raising related to the rent credits and the difference between what was described today. Yes, other agencies do rent credits. I understand that. I get that. A couple points. First of all, like from Land Division, they do a rent credit, but they know what value that rent credit is in exchange for whatever the work that's being done. The bigger deal is the rent credit is for the land that the tenant is occupying. In other words, if I'm going to clear trees off of the property that I'm licensed to occupy, I may get a rent credit for the work that I'm doing on my property. The rent credits that we were describing, however, that was for work that was done on not only common areas of the Galbraith estate lands, but also on other tenants, other licensees' properties. Like for instance, when they dug the reservoirs on the other properties, that was not on the tenant that received the rent credit or that is to receive the rent credit. That was not on his property. That was on other properties within the Galbraith lands. The roadways that he put down the rubble from the Pully Highway work, that wasn't on his land. That was on the common areas of the Galbraith lands. So I think there's a difference of understanding as to what we were describing, because that was our concern, that these rent credits that were undefined at the time and maybe still undefined, that they were being given for work that was not within the parcel, and perhaps those activities needed to go through some procurement. So we suggested that be the state procurement office be asked for an opinion about that, and that people get procurement training so they would be able to identify when things like a rent credit might be applicable and when it might not be, and when those services might have to be procured pursuant to the state procurement code.
I appreciate that clarification. I think going back to my original question, do you think it would have been helpful to have a discussion like the one that you're having right now with us during the exit interview, had the ADC been able to review the draft recommendations?
Yeah, I think possibly. I think I don't think it's that challenging to read the recommendations and understand that they are basically mimicking what the statute requires. I would hope that the auditee, any auditee, I'm not just talking about ADC, would be able to read the report and then understand from the findings in the report what the recommendations are trying to address. And if we didn't do a very good job about that, then that is on us. We'll take that responsibility. But like I mentioned yesterday and last week when we were talking about the SLDF, it really is the agency that needs to focus on those findings. So if they don't agree with whatever the recommendation is, they got to be able to address the finding in a different way. So part of the challenge may be they don't understand the finding, and that's our chance to discuss that during the exit conference. So if they didn't understand why we were suggesting that it wasn't appropriate to give rent credits to this tenant because they thought rent credits are given by other agencies, we could have had the discussion that you and I are having with them so that it could be clarified that it ain't about giving the rent credits to the person for their own property. There's issues there because it's undefined. But the bigger deal is that they're giving rent credits for work that is not on that tenant or that licensee's property. It's on other properties.
Thank you, Auditor. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions actually about this timing. And I appreciate your difference of opinion, but these are just a simple question, Mr. Kondo. At that point that you had provided the draft report with the findings without the recommendations, did you have the recommendations in hand already?
I don't think so. I think that at that point we have them in draft. And I think at that point, if there are things that are going to come out of an exit conference that cause us to rethink, then that will be considered. But I keep, and I'm sorry if I keep.
Thank you. No, thank you. So you had.
Okay.
You don't believe you had a copy of the final recommendations, but they were in draft. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is the draft report truly a draft report where the agencies can comment and then we'll make changes if they raise substantial significant comments?
Of course. I mean, I explained the other day that at the point when we give the draft to the agency, we're confident that it is ready for prime time, that it is supported, it's gone through our quality control review process. So we're confident in the findings themselves. But like I mentioned the other day, if during an exit conference, somebody tells us, hey, we got all these documents, they're here in the corner, and you're saying we don't have policies and procedures, for instance, we got a whole box of them, and for whatever reason, there was a misunderstanding that we asked for them and we didn't get them. So now they're going to pull the box out, they're going to give it to us, we're going to go home and we're going to look at this box of documents. And if we think that, yeah, these are things that we're saying they don't have and that they actually have these procedures documented, we will go back and we are going to readjust our report for sure. We're not going to issue a report that's not accurate, that's not helpful. I mean, that's our job, is to be,
Thank you.
to do a meaningful assessment.
So applying the same standards that you said that the draft findings were basically in final form, and you just said.
I didn't say that, Rep. I said we had. Oh, I'm sorry. We had. That's correct. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about recommendations. Excuse me.
So you said the findings were, you were very confident and it was in pretty much final form. You also just said that the draft recommendations are basically just mimicking the statute. So there really shouldn't have been anything surprising. So why wouldn't you want to share that with the auditing audited agency if it was really just, like you just said, it was mimicking the statute?
I think the experience in talking and listening to what's going on with ADC, I think that really illustrates why it's not a good idea to provide the recommendations. And what I mean by that is, and maybe the committee is very focused on the recommendations too, and certainly ADC is and has been, and what I've listened to their board meetings, it seems like that's all they really want to look at. And as I keep repeating myself, that's not what they need to be concerned about. They need to be concerned about, focus on, look at the findings. The things that we found are not going very well. And if there's different ways to skin that cat, that's great. But that is the importance of the report. It's the findings. It's not so much the recommendations.
Okay, Auditor, I have another question to move on to the timing of the report and all of the constructing of the report. You, in your audit, you say your audit was performed from June 2019 to March 2020 in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards. Are you saying, what do you mean by that statement? It's at page 3. Our audit was performed from June 2019 to March 2020.
That's when we performed, that's when we started the audit and we completed our field work.
So you started the audit June 2019 and you completed the field work on March 2020. Did you conduct any more field work after March 2020?
No.
Okay, so at what point did you have your preliminary findings and recommendations?
It would have been prior to us starting drafting, so it probably would have been somewhere around the end of March of 2020.
Okay, so end of March 2020, you had finished your PFNR. Is that correct?
I'm going to guess. I don't have the dates in front of me, but that would be my assumption.
Okay, can you go back and look into your working papers to confirm that it is end of March 2020 that your preliminary findings and recommendations were completed?
What is the purpose for that?
I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to get all the way to the point where you provided the final report to the agency.
Okay.
So, okay, and then the drafting process would have, according to the presentation you did yesterday, the drafting process would have been from end of March 2020 until when?
I don't know, we're still here today, but I'll take us back to that period of time. Governor shut us down. We all work from home. Agencies were now struggling to be able to work from home and adjust to the new quote normal. And we put, as all of you should know, all of the representatives, we put the audit work that we were doing on ice. In other words, we understood that agencies that we were auditing, and not just auditing, it could be getting information for different types of reports that we issue to the legislature, like those special fund reports that we issue every year. We understood that we couldn't just keep going back to them and demanding that we get this information and it be given to us timely. So we put our audit work and other type of report work on ice because we understood the state as a whole was challenged to be able to adjust. And what we did instead is we looked to provide, quote, value to the state and to you folks by looking at old reports, looking at these special fund reports, identifying these special funds that contain money that are through other funding mechanisms, not the general fund, and identifying balances in those funds that we thought were relatively significant that the legislature might want to take a look at to see about if they needed to sweep any money to cover the hole that was to our economy caused by COVID. So if you're asking me, did we start drafting in March and did we continue all the way until whenever the report was issued? The answer is no. Because like I just said, we put it on ice because of COVID.
Okay, understood. So,
okay.
And then at what point did you restart the work on the drafting?
I don't know. I don't have a date specific in front of me.
Okay, can you go and confirm when you did begin to restart work on drafting and report back to the committee?
I cannot, because I don't think that we're going to have a date specific any place like in anywhere. And I don't understand the relevance of any of this. You know, we did our audit work per the process that I've described in terms of the timing of when things happened. You know, you got a report that's very meaningful, that has a lot of really significant findings. You know, we issued it in January of 2021. You know, if you want to criticize us for being late, not 20 days before session, we were, I don't know, 10 days or 15 days before session. But we issued the report timely.
Okay, that's not, I'm not getting to that point yet, but
Okay.
I'm trying to understand the process, and you outlined yesterday that after the preliminary findings and recommendations, there will be report drafting. And then I'd like to know, at what point did the independent review occur? When did that occur?
It happens when the draft is done.
Okay, so can you find a date certain when that independent review was started and when it ended?
No, Representative, this is our process. I've described our process to you, right? In terms of the dates when things start and stop, you know, that's really not relevant at all. We issued a report. If you have some concerns about the report that we issued, let's talk about that. But the process, you know, I've spent a lot of time talking about the process because it's really important. And I don't understand any question or criticism that you have about the process.
I appreciate, and I actually agree with you that the process is very important, Auditor Kondo. So it's a simple factual question. When did the independent review start and finish?
I don't know. You know, I
look into your records,
Oh,
refresh the collection, and tell me and tell the committee, when did the independent review start and end?
I don't understand the purpose of these questions. I think that the report, or what the committee is losing track of, is that there are really significant issues with this agency and SLDF for that matter that really need to be addressed. Now, you know, our process, I've described it, our process is solid. You know, so what you seem to be trying to do is continue to try to get into our work papers, which I've explained, and I hear you asking questions to different auditees or people that you're interviewing about waiver of confidentiality, but I don't understand what's going on, I guess, but I have told you repeatedly that the work papers are confidential, right? So information is confidential in there, including, you know, the IR comments and those kind of things that are just confidential. Go ahead.
I'm not asking for the comments, Auditor Kondo. All I'm simply asking for is the date when the independent review started and ended.
Okay, I acknowledge the request.
Okay, the next question is, the draft report was provided to ADC on December 23rd. So what I would like to understand is the amount of time between when technically you said the independent review occurs, and once that's done, then it can be provided to the agency. And what I'm trying to understand is, could there have been more time provided to the agency to review what were these very serious findings, so that they would have had more than just the 9 days at the end of the year when it was peppered with holidays in which to respond to the very serious findings you made? That is the reason why I'm asking these questions, Mr. Kondo. So again, I repeat the question. When was the independent review started and completed?
I don't know, and I said that earlier, but I responded to Representative Ichiyama about the timing of the opportunity to review the report. And like I responded to her, I don't recall ADC asking for additional time. I don't recall ADC asking for an extension. And certainly I don't even understand ADC today to be arguing about the findings. So I'm not sure of your concern, whether we gave them, 9 days or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Okay, first of all, like I said, I didn't hear a request, but I don't hear them arguing that the findings are off base. We also had the meeting with them. So we had a chance, or they had a chance to talk about it with us. You're talking about the written response, right? But we had the meeting. I don't know if they needed more time to read the report, digest the report, and have a meeting with us.
Okay, so what I'm requesting you, Mr. Kondo, to do is to go back and review and inform the committee when the independent review started and ended.
As I told you, I'm not agreeing to that. I'm acknowledging your request.
And are you refusing to answer the question?
I'm answering the question. You asked me, when did the IR start? I told you, I don't know. When did it finish? I told you, I don't know.
Can
So
you go back and look in your records to determine when the independent review started and when it ended, so you can inform the committee as to those dates?
Okay, and as I said a couple times already, I don't know if I'm agreeable to that, but I told
Why
you,
aren't you agreeable to that?
I am hearing your question and I acknowledge it. So I'm not
Why do you not
refusing
want
to
answer
answer
the
any of your question. I'm just
Why
telling
do you
you,
want to answer that question?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you
because-
want to answer a simple factual question about when the independent review started and when it ended?
Well, if I could answer it, I would, but I'm telling you, I don't know the answer. I'm telling you also, there's no relevance to that information. I've explained our process. I've explained the opportunity. You may not agree that they had enough time, and that's okay. It sounds to me like ADC doesn't think they had enough time. But like I said, there was opportunity to discuss the report and to ask for more time if they needed more time to do the written response. We didn't get that request. And like I just said earlier, I don't see ADC complaining right now that the report or the findings in the report, that they somehow are inaccurate. I hear you guys complaining that there are things or suggesting that there are things in there that are not accurate, but it's not based upon anything but it seems like your own belief. But I don't hear ADC saying that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kondo, for your comment. Again,
Mhm.
I am simply asking, when did the independent review start and end? And your response is, I don't know. And you are not going to look into the records to be able to inform the committee when the independent review started and ended. Is that correct?
I said, I've heard your request. I acknowledge it. I don't know if we're agreeable to it.
So you will not answer the question?
I answered the question. You asked, when did it start? I said, I don't know. You asked, am I going back to provide the information to you? I said, I don't know, but I have acknowledged the request. I understand
Why
that's.
are you not agreeable to tell me and the committee the simple factual event of when the independent review started and ended?
Because it's irrelevant to what this committee is supposed to be doing, right?
Mr.
I've
Kondo,
explained to you, can I finish my answer? I've explained to you the reasons why your request is not relevant. And I've explained to you our process, and there's nothing in the record. You had ADC here this morning. There's nothing in the record that would suggest that there was any issue with our process, including the last leg of that process, which is allowing ADC to comment on the report. So that's the reason why. That's the reason why,
Thank you
Chair.
for your response. And Mr. Kondo, it's not for you to determine what is the relevant question.
Okay.
It's for this committee to determine the relevance. And it is relevant to this committee to understand your full process. And part of understanding that full process is to understand a simple factual question of when did the independent review start and when did it finish? So will you answer the question, Mr. Kondo? When did the independent review start and when did it finish?
Here, I'm not laughing because I think it's a funny question. I'm laughing because I feel like I've answered that question half a dozen times already. I don't know when the independent review started and when it finished with respect to this report and frankly, any other report that we've issued. I don't have those dates in my head. I do not know.
Okay, so and then I'm going to follow up and ask, will you go back to your working papers to just provide the simple factual date of when the independent review started and when it ended?
And as I said earlier to that question multiple times, I don't know if we will. I've acknowledged the request. I hear you. I know what you're requesting. I hear it. you want to get into our work papers, and I've told you no. So I hear you. I understand what you've asked for, but if I had an answer for you, I would respond. But
Okay,
I don't
thank you
know
for being
what you're asking.
non-responsive at this moment and being
Okay.
unwilling to cooperate with the committee to just identify a simple date. That's all this committee is asking. So we're going to move on. Members, are there any other questions? Okay. Representative Tarnas.
Thanks. I'm just curious, we learned this morning that all the legal agreements were in fact reviewed and approved by the ADC's legal counsel, their deputy AG. Would you have expected that the deputy AG should have advised ADC to change the way they operated, or memorialize some of these agreements that you said there are certainly examples where people were on the land without any sort of legal agreements? Would you have expected the deputy AG to have raised a red flag and said, no, you have to correct this?
I think there's two parts to that answer, Representative. First of all, I think I don't know the review that was done by the Deputy Attorney General. It's my assumption that the review is to review the form of the agreement. So, I don't know if you've seen some of those agreements. On the bottom left, often it says approved as to form, and then the Deputy Attorney General will sign there. So my understanding is they're looking at the verbiage of the agreement and not necessarily the details of the deal. So I don't know that. So I would suggest that question is better posed to ADC. I heard the discussion this morning, but I'm not sure that the question and the answer were apples to apples. So that would be my first response to you. The second response, I guess, is a question that's better also posed to the Attorney General or maybe ADC as to what their responsibility is if it's not just looking at the form, if it is to, in fact, ensure that the details of the transaction are correctly memorialized in the form. I think that's whether that's the responsibility of the Deputy Attorney General or whether that's the responsibility of ADC and its staff. I think that's a better question posed to them. It's also a question that may be helpful if you had a process, a procedure that then you and I could say, oh, it definitely is the responsibility of the Deputy Attorney General. That's where we failed, or it's definitely the responsibility of ADC staff, and particularly this title. That's where this process failed. That's the value of having documented policies and procedures for a government agency, and frankly, any agency, but a government agency especially, because then someone like us can go in and audit the process and we can identify where the failure was.
Okay, all right. I'll follow up. Again, I'm looking at oversight of ADC and how they operate and comparing what I understand from the audit and from ADC. ADC informed us this morning that the Board of Ag had actually approved back in 2008 the delegation of authority to the ADC Executive Director to approve all these projects and project agreements. But you were emphasizing the need for the Board of Ag to approve these licenses. Were you informed about this delegation of authority, and how did that affect your findings and recommendations?
We were informed of that, and we did. I'm trying to look as I talk to you. We did report about that in the report itself, and I think a couple things that we commented about is, darn it, I wish I could have it at my fingertips better. But the things that we commented about was, first of all, Ms. Kaichi provided us that document, but was unaware of it before she was able to stumble upon it. And I'm sorry, before I even say that, I should find the section and be, I guess, very careful about how I'm describing it or characterizing it. I'm sorry, I cannot find it, but I think the other points that we were trying to raise is that, first of all, the current Department of Agriculture, the chair of the Board of Agriculture, who you guys are going to talk to on Thursday. It's my recollection that she was unaware of this delegation at the time that we spoke with her. That's one. Number two, she certainly was not the board chair. And I'm going to guess that most of the members of the Board of Agriculture were not on the Board of Agriculture in 2009. So I would presume that if you were to poll them, that they probably are unaware of this delegation. And they're delegating not just the chair, but the board's authority under statute to review and approve these projects that ADC is doing, right? So it's a significant responsibility that has been delegated, at least purportedly, by another board, whatever number of years ago that is, 12 years ago, that these board members may not even be aware that they delegated that authority. So we raised those questions. And on top of that, even if the current Board of Agriculture chairperson was going to approve in her delegated capacity, we don't see any record with the Board of Agriculture that she approved anything, or even her predecessors. I think what ADC believed and what they told us is that approval as an ADC board member by the board chair or the board chair's designee was equivalent to approval by the Board of Agriculture, at least the delegated authority to the board chair. I don't think that is correct. And that's what we reported, that the Board of Agriculture is different than the Board of Agribusiness Development Corporation. And those need to be memorialized separately.
Understood. And I appreciate that you did address this in the audit, and I know the other members of the committee know that. But I know that the public has a great deal of interest in these proceedings, and I wanted to make sure that those who are watching are able to understand this issue, because delegation of authority is a very significant matter.
May I add another comment to your question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I know that she's a very conscientious and busy lady, the current board chair for the Board of Agriculture. And when she became the board chair is when we interviewed her. And I remember that she said that she's so busy that sometimes she doesn't come to the ADC board meetings because she is, as long as ADC has quorum. I hope that's changed today. But, to make this, and her role there, my assumption is because she's one of the ex officio members, her, the DBED director, as well as DLNR chair. It's because this agency is supposed to has many different hats. I talked about it yesterday. Economic development seems to be really what they should be doing. I think Mr. Nagatani and others may think of this as an ag organization, but he also talked, and you guys talked today about that there's some overlaps, and maybe some synergies between DOA and ADC and maybe CTAR. I mean, it's very important to have the Board of Agriculture chair present, and for the board to kind of understand where all these pieces fit in. Anyway, so my comment, I guess, was that even at some point, even Phyllis was not able to attend some of the meetings that of the ADC board. And like I said, I understand that she was very challenged because she just became the chair and was busy trying to do many other things that are important for her. Anyway. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have two more questions, Chair Belatti, but let me yield to others who have questions.
Representative Kobayashi.
Hey, Chair. So I just want to focus in a little bit more on your end of audit process. We had a good discussion yesterday about the front end, your risk assessment and your scope setting. And I found that to be I guess, to be honest, for me, auditing can be a very rote process in that people follow the same procedures for every audit for different, and maybe with slightly different variations depending on differences in who you're auditing. But I found the scope setting and the risk assessment to be consistent with really the only way that there is to do it. I think there's only one way to do it, and that's never changed in 50 years of auditing. I think at the back end, and in between there, when you're doing the field work, obviously that's a lot more specific to who you're auditing, and it can change greatly depending on what risk you're looking at and how you're doing it. But front end and back end, I think, are relatively rote processes that are the only way auditing can work. So you've described what your process is, and I think it's fairly simple, where you complete the audit, you get a draft report, somebody references that report, come with a final report, you let the auditee know, they schedule an audit meeting. If there's not enough time, they ask you for more. And then you get together, and that's where they respond to things. You should report saying this is everything. And that's what I've done for a lifetime. So when I was an auditor. And what I'm interested to know is, because there seems to be some kind of sentiment that maybe this was handled a little differently than the way you usually do. You're somebody who's done a lot of audits. And at the back end in particular, which is the focus right now, that process of referencing, letting the subject agency know of your findings, giving them some time and meeting with them. Did you do anything differently this time than what you've done for every other audit that you've done for the state of Hawaii?
Same process.
There's only one way to do it, right? I mean, that's the only way I know. But so there's no circumstance that you would have treated this any differently than any other audit you've done for the state?
No circumstance. I don't know what the circumstance might be, but we treated this audit the same as we treat every other audit from beginning to end, except for the fact that we had COVID that stuck its, kind of came in between us, and it's still here, but we stopped because of COVID. That was the only difference in this audit and others that are still ongoing, but the process has been the same.
Yeah, aside from, what the lockdown caused, I guess, that is definitely an odd situation. But as far as just your general procedures, the front and back end, it sounds like what you always do and what people do. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, Representative Pruso?
Yeah, so Rep. Tarnas actually asked my question about legal risk, violation of federal environmental law and Kauai. So I did still have a question about your recommendations regarding insurance, because I felt like in the conversation this morning, I had staff working on this over the course of session, TJ Charisma, and her insights into the lack of insurance did not connect at all to the understanding of the ADC staff. So can you talk a little bit what you meant by that particular recommendation?
I think we talked about this at lunch today because I wanted to get a better understanding. So there were two insurance issues, and this probably is not the first of which I'm going to describe. The first one is, and we talked about it yesterday, is the fact that some of the tenants or the licensees looking at their files, it was unclear whether they had insurance, which is a requirement of the license. I think this one was really the concern being with all the other activities that we reported that were happening around the Whitmore properties, the criminal activities, the murders that we talked about yesterday, the chop shop, those type of things, that we thought that perhaps ADC needed to consider procuring its own insurance to, quote, protect the state. I understand what Ms. Kaichi was saying yesterday about today about the DAGS risk, or maybe, the DAGS risk folks, or is it DAGS or BNF or whoever, that they generally insure the state. Yes, I understood that.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair? Okay, I have a question around the risk analysis and the elimination of the consideration of the Kauai lands. Auditor, can you just reiterate again why you believed that a focus on the Kauai lands for the purposes of this audit was not necessary, and why you, quote, risked it out?
We didn't think it was not necessary, but because we only have limited staff and limited time, we go through the risk assessment process like I described earlier. And part of that process is to make sure that we don't audit things, given the time, given the staff, that is not significant. It's not a big deal if whatever the key activity is not happening. The likelihood that the key activity, that risk is going to occur is low. Those are the types of activities that we don't audit. We risk them out. But with respect to the Kauai lands, as I don't recall the phrase that was used this morning, but those lands came to ADC, kind of as a package. They came with tenants. So those were lands that used to be managed by the land division of DLNR, and they were transferred to ADC under executive orders. And so they came with these, with tenants, they came with licenses or revocable permits already in place. So there was no challenge for ADC, or much less of a risk with respect to those properties in terms of acquisition. They came by EO, management of those lands because they were already set. And then as described today, there were, and we talked about yesterday, both of those properties have associations. And I think the video that we saw this morning was from one of the associations. So the associations manage and in essence take care of those properties, including especially the common infrastructure. I think that we also, I think we mentioned it yesterday, and I think maybe it was discussed this morning, that they actually have somebody under contract that is doing property inspections. I think it's a former land division land agent that is on Kauai, a former Kauai land division land agent. And I think it's my understanding and my recollection that he goes and does these property inspections with a checklist with pictures that he sends to ADC regularly so that they know that the property is being inspected and is being used for the purposes that they're supposed to be used, and there's no unauthorized activity in those lands. So for all those reasons, the risk to us was low, or the, using our term, it was not significant. And for that reason, they did not become part of our objective.
Okay, and your objective was stated as process for acquiring former plantation lands, facilitating their transition to other agricultural uses. And what I'm quoting to is number 3 on page 3, those 4 objectives.
Oh, no, number 3, as I explained yesterday, when we looked at the records of the agency, okay, is that the one that you're looking at?
I'm looking at your audit objectives on page 3 of your audit. So it was, so based upon everything that you said,
yes,
you didn't feel that Kauai needed to be considered.
I think what I was describing in response to, I think, an earlier question, maybe it was Representative Tarnas, is just more generally why the Kauai lands were not really the focus of the audit. And because the objectives, as you read, was about the acquisition of these lands, which, as I was explaining yesterday, to us is not really their purpose, but nevertheless, that's become their purpose, to acquire these lands. So we wanted to assess this process, which was described by the executive director today, probably as concisely and as he could, which is direction by the legislature. So we wanted to assess their acquisition, but also the transition or transformation of those lands. So that's what we did. The Kauai lands were already transformed, meaning they already had tenants. So that's why we didn't include them. In terms of the processes, right? It's the processes that we looked at were really those acquisition processes for managing the lands. If you're asking, the challenges on Kauai are different than the challenges here on Oahu when you had vacant lands, primarily vacant lands versus lands that already had tenants on it, had associations that were farmers associations, co-ops that were in place that were, in essence, doing the job of managing those lands. Am I answering your question?
I think you're going to a far field, so I'm going to ask another question.
Sure.
This is the basic question. So in your field work, did your team identify the arrangement where ADC had an initial memorandum of agreement that they entered into with the cooperative, the KAA association?
In our planning work, we have copies. We received copies from ADC of both of the MOUs that they entered into with both of the co-ops.
Okay, and then as Ms. Kaiichi described it today, there was an initial MOA that was entered into 2007, and then a restated MOA that was entered into 2008. And the process she described about entering into there was very difficult, and that they continue to do tweaks. Is that basic information what your audit team understood?
I don't know. I mean, we didn't audit like I said, we didn't audit the oversight of those lands, which would include the relationship between ADC and ADC's management of those lands and oversight of the co-ops. We didn't do that.
Okay, so another curious, just simple fact that we learned from Ms. Kaichi today is that RMOA, the restated memorandum of agreement, is in place for another 35 years. So if it comes due, they can change it substantially in 2043. And my understanding is that it's a co-op and that there's prime members and other members of that co-op. So just having come off the audit with SLDF and all of these lands that are locked up and licenses changing and agreements changing, did this signal to you at all that maybe we should have looked at this process, look at the MOA and see maybe is there a way that it could have been revised in the interest of the state, and so that we're not caught in the same trap that SLDF has been caught in before, where we're like asking the agency to amend something or look at a process before it's too late?
The simple answer is no, but again, we're not investigating. We're not looking at one issue. We're looking at a process, right? It's a horizontal review of an operation or an activity. It's not one MOU. It's not one license. So we're looking at a process.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I would maybe in the auditing process, because the model on Kauai is so different and it locks up so much land, and it's an opportunity perhaps for other small farmers, and I don't know. And so this is what we're going to look at since it wasn't audited in your report. What I'd like to know now is what is in the restated MOA, and is there a process where other tenant farmers, different tenant farmers other than the large seed corn or the prime members, the bigger tenants, is there a process where we might be able to now facilitate more transition of these lands rather than have them locked up as they've been in 2003? So because the audit didn't go into that, understood, that's where the questions now become relevant. And so that's a significant portion of land. And so no basic kind of auditing work was done with respect to those questions. Is that correct?
It is, but I think your understanding of the co-ops and the MOUs may not be accurate. My understanding is that there are license agreements or revocable permits with the individual land users. The co-op is a farmers cooperative. It's an organization that the farmers belong to or the tenants belong to. I don't understand those co-ops to have a master lease like what was described with respect to SIBA, Sand Island Business Association. It's not my understanding that there's a master lease. It's cooperative, it's co-ops, it's farmer co-ops. These people are members of the co-op. That's my understanding.
Thank you. So we're going to be looking into that further. And I just wanted to understand that that wasn't something that your field work delved into.
It wasn't something that we audited, and we wouldn't have done anything in field work because we would have decided after planning that we would have arrived at our objectives after planning. So we wouldn't have bothered ADC with records requests for information that was outside of the audit objectives.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kondo. Any other questions? Representative Prusa.
I do have a question because one of the major findings that you had was with respect to the failure of the board to provide oversight for the executive director. And I think that's really important. It's a structural problem. But I'm wondering what that looks like, because I've been attending ADC meetings, and I really feel like the executive director drives the policy agenda and also the operational work. So what kind of evidence would I look for them? Because I would like to see the evaluation, for example, of the executive director, or some other evidence that the board is driving the policy machine. Where would I find that? I mean, maybe it's a counterfactual kind of question. I'm asking you for something that might not exist.
I don't know the answer to your question. I think that question is better posed to the board members about what matters that they are considering. I mean, my thought to you would be, and this is what we looked at too. We look at the agendas, we look at the board minutes, we see what the board is doing. And we see, like, for instance, we report that the board has very little, if any, discussion on matters brought before it about licenses, people that are applying to license ADC lands up in Wahiawa and Whitmore. That lack of discussion seems to reflect that there's not, that the executive director is, the recommendations of staff and the executive director, they are being accepted without much discussion.
While we're talking, I just thought of my own example. So I think that the formation of those pigs, so they have created a couple of pigs, that I think might be evidence of a shift towards more oversight and engagement by the board.
I heard Ms. Kaichi talk about the pig, and I don't know exactly what the pig is tasked to do, but from what she was describing, my notes here, I'm looking at my notes to try to find where I scribbled, but my notes were that it sounded to me like the pig is being tasked, and the pig is comprised of board members, that they're being tasked to develop policies that to me were staff level, day-to-day operational policies. To me, and what we reported, the structure of a board staff organization, the board is supposed to set the high-level direction of the organization. They're supposed to approve this agribusiness development plan so that we all will know what the path the organization is going to walk down, and the executive director and the rest of the staff can see that. In terms of the day-to-day operations, whether it's admin rules, like I know Representative Tarnas was talking about, whether it's internal policies and procedures to direct and help their day-to-day internal operations, to me, in my opinion, those are staff level things. So, like I said, I'm not sure I really understood what Ms. Kaichi was describing today, but my notes, when she was talking about that, I questioned whether or not, again, there may be a disconnect, a misunderstanding is a better word, excuse me, between what the board's responsibilities are and what staff's responsibilities should be.
Yeah, thank you. And just for clarification, the pig is a permitted interaction group. So. Correct, yes. Under the Sunshine Law, Chapter 92, Part 1.
Okay, any final questions from any members? Chair Tarnas, go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to ask another question. This will be my last one. And we brought this up before, and I brought it up with ADC today, and I just wanted one more time to bring it up. Did you evaluate whether licenses and rights of entry are the appropriate legal mechanism for disposition of land as opposed to leases or revocable permits?
Okay, we commented on that. I don't know what the appropriate vehicle is, the legal vehicle, but we commented about concerns when you only issue licenses. And so the explanation that whether it was Ms. Kaichi or Mr. Nakatani provided you today, that's what they told us, that it's expensive to subdivide land. And you have to subdivide the land if you're going to enter into leases, because you need the most, and I'm not aware of the financial institutions or the trend that Ms. Kaichi was describing in terms of the larger financial institutions perhaps being able to take on the risk of a license. But in terms of leases, we reported that financial institutions, you can mortgage your leasehold interest in a property. We weren't aware that you could mortgage your license interest in a property, because the license really just gives you the right to use or enter the property. It doesn't give you the right to kind of, have that I want to call it an ownership interest, but it's less than that, obviously, because it's a leasehold interest. So it's a different right that the license and the lease are conveying. And the way that it's often described in terms of the license, it's like the boundary is the tree line over there, and it goes to that pond over there, and it comes over here. And that's the challenge for a lot of the financial institutions, it's my understanding, as to why they're challenged to allow you to secure a loan on a license. And in addition to that, the interest that you're being secured. In other words, it's not that ownership or that leasehold interest, it's just your ability to, enter in and use the property. So yeah, we had we reported some concerns, and I think one of the discussions that we had the other day, yesterday, I guess it only was, about Ohana Best, which is the lawsuit. I think that in that text box, we reported the attorney for Ohana Best, saying many of the things that I'm saying right now, and on behalf of his clients, that he did not think that his client would be able to secure financing if all he was getting or the company was getting was a license. I'm sorry, I gave you a very long-winded answer, but I don't know the answer to that. But I think that we raised some concerns about what ADC is doing, especially if you need a small farmer that may not have the assets to secure a loan or have their own financial wherewithal to develop the property. It would be challenging if you're not able to use the property to secure that loan.
Okay, I appreciate that. You raised concerns. You didn't determine whether it was appropriate or not, but you just raised concerns.
Correct. Outside the scope of our audit. And
Understood.
maybe even.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Auditor Kondo. Back to you, Chair Belatti.
Okay, any final questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Kono, for joining us for this additional hour and 15 minutes. We're going to conclude this.
Do I have an ability, or I think you had told me that I could make a closing statement?
We probably will be bringing you back, but if you wanted to at some point, because there will be we're going to continue to review documents, but if you wanted to make a statement,
I would like to.
I'll give you 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank those members of the committee who are genuinely trying to hold ADC accountable. However, it's very obvious that for some of you, the sole purpose of these hearings is to try to find some fault with my office and the work that we do, to continue the questionable effort started by the speaker to undermine our independence and to exert influence over my office through what he called the Auditor Working Group. The questions that some of you have asked me during these hearings have insinuated that our work fell short, but you have not offered any basis to support those accusations. As dubious as questions have been, they very clearly illustrate the huge difference between this committee and my office. Our work is based on fact, not rumor or innuendo. Our work is guided by government auditing standards, not personal vendettas. And our work is peer reviewed every 3 years. That means other state auditors review our work to confirm that our work is being performed in accordance with government auditing standards. We are professional, independent, nonpartisan, and objective, period. We take our responsibilities seriously. We do not play politics. The fact that you are attacking us, me and my office, clearly reflects some members' priorities. It apparently is not a priority and seemingly never was a priority to understand our audit and ADC's actions to address the findings. It was never about holding ADC accountable. It was never about helping ADC to be the leader that the legislature envisioned, to promote and develop those agricultural enterprises, to facilitate investments and co-ventures. It was never about the agricultural industry or the need to develop another economic engine, or even about helping our farmers. We have made a number of significant and important findings. We found an agency that doesn't understand its purpose, and because of that is doing little to lead the conversion of former plantation lands into a dynamic new agricultural industry. We found that ADC has not created a meaningful agribusiness plan, a plan required by law to establish goals, objectives, priorities, and policies for a development strategy that would clarify for ADC its leadership role in the effort to revive and reimagine Hawaii's agricultural industry. We found ADC struggles in managing its lands, exposing the state to unnecessary risk and liability. From its poor and in many cases non-existent record keeping, to farmers occupying and using ADC lands without a formal agreement, to criminal activities occurring on those lands. We found the board of directors provides minimal guidance and oversight to the corporation. The issues that we've reported have significant repercussions. In addition to the unnecessary risk and liability, the state has paid a high cost for ADC's past inactions, and we continue to pay. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need to grow our state's economy, to replace the economic void from the shuttered sugar and pineapple plantations. That was the economic void that ADC was created to fill, to lead the development of a new dynamic agricultural enterprise. The committee should stop chasing windmills. It needs to focus on holding ADC accountable, on considering whether the purpose for ADC, the purpose for which ADC was created continues to be relevant, and on developing policies to grow the state's agricultural economy. These are important issues that are ripe for legislative action. My office is a valuable resource for the legislature, and really for every resident, every taxpayer. We speak truth to power through objective, unbiased assessments about how agencies are performing their work, how they're using public resources. We are a watchdog. We did our job. We did it well. And irrespective of whatever this committee is trying to do to my office, we will continue working to improve state government. That's our job. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Kondo, for your comments. Obviously, I clearly disagree that I don't believe it is appropriate for you to comment on the motives of this committee, especially because our committee's work is not yet done. So you have reached certain conclusions based on work that the committee is still doing. With that said, your statement is now part of the record, and I understand that you have those strong feelings, and I too hope that the auditor's office is the independent, objective watchdog that we expect it to be. This meeting is adjourned.